country's second largest bank is deep in damage control. Just days after delivering a dismal financial performance, Westpac stands accused of 23 million breaches of money laundering laws, facilitating terrorism and child sex offences. Boss Brian Hartzer rejects claims management was indifferent, but questions over his future are mounting. The Prime Minister says Mr Hartzer's resignation is a matter for the board, but says the allegations are disturbing and despicable.
They should be taking this very seriously, reflecting on it very deeply and taking the appropriate decisions for the protection of people's interests in Australia.
The pressure will be on Mr Hartzer and the board at next month's AGM. 5 directors are up for re-election, with a second strike on executive pay also on the agenda. Leading bank analyst Brian Johnson says the fun times are over for the banks. Brian Hartzer says that he will personally lead an investigation into these alleged 23 million breaches over a pedophile ring, financing terrorism alleged by AUSTRAC. Is he the best person to be heading up an investigation? Well,
ultimately it all comes down to what you think accountability is. And someone has got to be accountable. So I'd nearly summarise it as, when I have a look at the other banks, I saw Ian Narev, who was a great CEO at Commonwealth Bank. He basically left the job because we had some terrorism financing issues there. I saw Andrew Thorburn basically leave National Australia Bank as the CEO because at the end of the day, publicly they were saying they wanted to remediate the customers, but some of the staff weren't. Someone's got to be accountable for it. And so really I think the question comes down to, there are really 3 questions. Did the senior executives at Westpac know? Should they have known? And did they act in an appropriate way to deal with this?
No doubt we'll hear from investors. The Westpac AGM just 3 weeks away. We've got this issue. We've also got 5 directors up for re-election and a potential second strike. It's obviously going to be a fairly testy AGM.
Yeah, and it will. And really, I suppose one of the things is that I would have thought the board at Westpac will be sitting down and looking at what happened at Commonwealth Bank, where directors' scalps were basically claimed. And they'll have to really think about, you know, what they do. But it certainly is a significant issue, and it's one that Westpac really need to come out and address. And thus far we've had a very short stock exchange announcement. The management have decided to do a press briefing, but that's really all we've heard from the company as we sit here right now. And I think at some point they're really going to have to come out and say a little bit more than that.
NAB looks likely to be next in AUSTRAC's firing line. How widespread is this issue in our banking system?
Well, as far as I can work out, so one of the things is in Australia, companies have to disclose contingent liabilities. And so Commonwealth Bank presumably have already been through this. So I think we can be relatively confident that CommBank, it's been dealt with. In ANZ's case, there's no disclosure, and certainly every discussion I've had with them, they're not aware of any pending issue. NAB have been consistently disclosing that there is something there. But I'd also flag to you, since Phil Cronican came on as the acting CEO and the incoming chair, they've been openly engaging with AUSTRAC. So there's certainly, you can't rule out that there is something coming there, but I think to the extent that they've been actively really promoting it, it's something we should be aware of, but I'm not particularly panicked as much as I am about the Westpac issue. But can I flag to you, this idea of money laundering, it only works, it will only ever be as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And one of the things that basically AUSTRAC have put in there, right at the very back of the statement of claim, is small things matter. And I think they do. And while we love to focus on this as just being a banking issue, this could ripple into a lot of other industries. For example, you go to an auction in Sydney, you suddenly see someone bidding with money. Where did that money come from? So this could yet ripple well beyond the banking sector. And as I say, AUSTRAC, certainly some of the stuff they've found to date is pretty galling.
CBA settled out of court for $700 million. What do you think Westpac's final price will be on this?
Well, at this stage, the danger is that we have only heard the AUSTRAC claim. So we haven't actually yet heard the Westpac defence. But when you have a look at it, the fine, if you strictly go 23 million times by, you come up with a ridiculous number that basically is an extinction event for basically Westpac. So I think that is really off the table. But what will happen is any civil penalty that will be agreed, if in fact Westpac agrees that they've done the wrong thing, and as I say, we're yet to actually find that out, I think it would be enough to actually be quite painful, but the idea is not to necessarily cripple Westpac. So I think that we should be, the starting point before I read it was probably I'd been thinking half the size of the CBA one, and there's no more science to it than that, whereas I'd now be inclined to tell you it'll probably be the same size or greater than the CBA one. But that's based on nothing more than capacity to pay and the kind of like emotional response that we see from the Prime Minister. You know, there's a lot of demand that banks are held accountable for it, and that's one of the mechanisms that we see that does that.
Brian Johnson, it's great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.